If you are buying lenses in 2026, do not waste your money on the wrong glass. Because this year, some lenses are worth the hype, some are not, and one of them is so ridiculous it makes the rest of this list look normal. Welcome to Alt Buzz Lenses, where we cut through the gear noise and get straight to what actually matters. Hit subscribe if you are new, because this one is going to be worth your time. Here are the 10 lenses that do, and the buying links for all are in the description down below. At number 10, we have the Sigma 16 to 300mm f 3.5 to 6.7 DCOS Contemporary. If you have ever stood in front of a travel bag wondering how many lenses to bring, this lens is the answer to that argument. One lens, 16mm on the wide end, 300 on the long end, and almost every situation you will encounter as a content creator sitting somewhere in between. The Sigma 16 to 300 is not trying to be the best at any one thing. It is trying to make the excuse of not having the right lens completely irrelevant. What makes this lens genuinely remarkable is the reach it offers on an APS-C body. At 300mm on a crop sensor, you are effectively reaching the equivalent of 450mm in full-frame terms, which means wildlife, sports, sidelines, and distant subjects are all within range without carrying a second bag. Sigma also packed 19 elements across 13 groups into this lens, with special low dispersion elements keeping chromatic aberration controlled across that massive zoom range. The optical stabilization keeps things steady when you are shooting handheld. The contemporary line build keeps it accessible without feeling cheap. For travel creators, everyday shooters, and beginners who want one piece of glass to grow into, this is the one. It is not glamorous, but it is genuinely useful. And useful in 2026 is underrated. Fun fact, the zoom ratio on this lens is almost 19:1. That is roughly the same optical range as watching someone walk from across a football field all the way up to your face. That is the convenience pick. The next one is where the value starts getting serious. At number 9, we have the Tamron 16 to 30mm f 2.8 Di3 VXD G2. There is a version of this list where the Tamron 16 to 30 gets ignored because it does not have the loudest spec sheet or the flashiest launch. That would be a mistake. Because what this lens does is quietly solve a problem that a lot of mirrorless shooters have right now. Finding a wide zoom that is actually fast, actually sharp, and actually feels current in a 2026 workflow without spending a premium budget to get there. The Tamron 16 to 30 weighs around 350 grams, making it one of the lightest f2.8 wide zooms available for full-frame mirrorless systems right now. That is not an accident. Tamron built this for run-and-gun shooters who are already carrying a body, a microphone, and a stabilizer. The minimum focusing distance of just 17 centimeters at the wide end also means this lens doubles as a close-focus creative tool that most wide zooms completely ignore. f2.8 across the entire zoom range. The VXD autofocus motor refined across multiple generations. A wide end that gives you genuine environmental storytelling at 16mm and a 30mm, close enough to feel natural and intimate. The G2 designation means sharper optics, more responsive autofocus, and a feel that punches well above its price point. Fun fact, 17 centimeters minimum focus distance means you can get so close to a subject at 16mm that your lens hood is practically touching it, a trick that unlocks a kind of dramatic wide-angle close-up most people think you need a macro lens for. For mirrorless shooters who want a wide zoom that will not feel outdated by next year, this is the smart buy. The next one is built for a very specific kind of creator. If this list is already helping you narrow down what to buy, hit that subscribe button. We break down lenses, and you do not want to miss what is coming after this one. At number 8, we have the Nikon Nikkor Z 28 to 135mm f4 PZ. Nikon looked at what solo creators actually need and then built a lens around that answer. The Nikkor Z 28-135 is one of the most video-forward lenses on this entire list, and the power zoom is the reason why. Not a gimmick, not a convenience feature. A genuine tool that changes how smooth and controlled your zoom transitions look when you are shooting alone, without a second pair of hands on the rig. The power zoom can be controlled remotely via compatible Nikon bodies, meaning you can execute a perfectly smooth cinematic zoom pull without touching the lens barrel at all. This lens also covers a range that no other single native Z-mount lens currently matches at this price point, making it one of the most practical one-lens solutions Nikon has produced for the hybrid shooter who cannot afford to swap glass mid-shoot. 28mm gives you room to breathe in tighter spaces. 135 gives you enough reach to isolate a subject without repositioning. For a solo documentary filmmaker, for a YouTuber who needs one lens that handles both the talking head shot and the environmental coverage, this lens was built for you. The f4 aperture asks for a trade in subject separation, but delivers consistency across the entire range in almost any real-world lighting condition. That trade is worth it for the creator who values versatility. Fun fact, power zoom lenses were originally developed for broadcast television cameras in the 1960s, and Nikon basically brought that same broadcast-grade smooth zoom control into a mirrorless body you can carry in a backpack. That is the Creator lens. The next one is for APS-C shooters who are tired of being told their system is second best. At number 7, we have the Sigma 17-40mm f1.8 DC art. Let that aperture sit for a second, f1.8, across the entire zoom range. On a lens designed specifically for APS-C systems, this is the spec sheet that belongs on a prime lens, not a zoom. And Sigma put it on the 17-40 anyway, because apparently the art line does not know the meaning of the word reasonable. Every other zoom in the APS-C category at this focal range either opens at f2.8 at best or starts at f3.5 and slides variable as you zoom. Sigma did not do that. They built a zoom with the aperture of a fast prime, the focal flexibility of a walk-around lens, and the artline build quality that has made their glass genuinely respected among photographers who care about optical performance over brand loyalty. The hypersonic motor autofocus system is both fast enough for stills and quiet enough for video. This lens closes the gap for APS-C shooters. It gives crop sensor cameras the light gathering and subject separation that full-frame shooters have always used as their primary upgrade argument. The range, 17-40mm, is tight enough that specialist shooters will notice. But for street photographers, portrait shooters on APS-C, and creators who want the full-frame look without the full-frame investment, this is one of the most exciting releases of this entire cycle. Fun fact, f1.8 on an APS-C sensor produces a depth of field roughly equivalent to shooting f2.7 on full frame. So this lens is essentially handing crop sensor shooters a full frame look at a fraction of the cost and weight. That is the APS-C monster. Now the list starts getting wild. At number 6, we have the Sony FE 400-800mm f6.3 to 8 GOSS. This is the moment on the list where practical stops being the right word. 400mm on the short end, 800mm on the long. Sony's G series, optical stabilization, keeping that reach usable in real-world conditions. The Sony FE 400-800 is not a lens you take to a coffee shop. It is a lens you take to the edge of a lake at dawn when the birds are flying and you need to reach subjects that nothing else on this list can touch. At 800mm on a full-frame Sony body, a bird perched 60 meters away fills a meaningful portion of your frame. Sony built the GOSS system here to compensate for up to 5.5 stops of camera shake, which at this reach is the difference between a usable frame and a blur. The lens also accepts Sony teleconverters natively, which means 800mm is not the ceiling, it is the floor. The aperture range of f6.3 to 8 is the honest compromise. You are not getting the light gathering of a faster telephoto. But in exchange, you get a lens that is physically manageable, optically stabilized, and capable of reaching subjects that previously required glass twice the price. Fun fact, at 800 millimeters with a 2x teleconverter attached, you are sitting at 1600 millimeters, a focal length so extreme that the apparent distance between you and your subject is compressed by a factor of roughly 32 compared to the naked eye. That is the reach monster. The next one is premium polished and built for portraits that perform on video too. We are halfway through, and the list is only going to get more interesting from here. If you are watching this and thinking about which lens fits your setup, subscribe and drop your question in the comments. We read them, we answer them, and we build future videos around what you are asking about. At number 5, we have the Canon RF 85mm f1.4 L VCM. The 85mm portrait lens is one of the most competitive categories in all of photography. Every major system has one. Most of them are excellent. So when Canon launched the RF85 f1.4 LVCM, the question was not whether it would be good, it was whether it would be different enough to matter. The answer is yes. And the reason is in those 3 letters at the end. The voice coil motor in this lens achieves focus transitions in under 1/10 of a second in ideal conditions, which, for a portrait lens at f1.4, is extraordinary. At that aperture, the depth of field is so shallow that even small focus errors are immediately visible. The speed and precision of the voice coil motor eliminates that risk for video shooters entirely. Canon also updated the optical formula with a ground and polished aspherical element that noticeably reduces the onion ring bokeh structure that appeared in earlier RF portrait lenses. The rendering at f1.4 is everything you expect from Canon's premium glass, rich, 3-dimensional, with subject separation that makes a portrait feel like it was lit on a film set. The autofocus delivers that rendering in motion, in real time, without the breathing and hunting that made fast portrait lenses difficult for video. For hybrid shooters waiting for Canon to close the gap between their stills legacy and their video ambitions, this is that lens. Fun fact, the 85mm focal length became the gold standard for portrait photography, partly because it matches the angle of view the human eye uses when consciously focusing on a face. Which is why portraits shot at 85 feel natural in a way that wider focal lengths simply cannot replicate. That is the premium portrait pick. The next one goes wide and gets even more dramatic. At number 4, we have the Canon RF 20mm f1.4 LVCM, 20mm at f1.4. Read that again, because what Canon has done here is build a wide-angle option that should change how video-first creators think about low-light shooting. The RF20 is not a subtle lens. It is not the glass you reach for when you want a clean, neutral scene. It is the lens you reach for when you want the scene to feel like something. Before this lens existed, getting f1.4 at 20mm meant going third-party manual focus or accepting significant optical compromises. Canon changed that. 14 elements across 11 groups with 2 ultra-low dispersion elements and 2 aspherical elements managing the distortion and chromatic aberration that typically plague ultra-wide fast primes. Distortion is corrected both optically and in camera. The minimum focusing distance of just 18 centimeters opens up dramatically close, wide-angle shots that feel almost macro in intensity. At 20mm, you are pulling the environment in, making rooms expansive, skies cinematic, and tight spaces dramatic in a way longer lenses cannot replicate. The voice coil motor system means smooth silent focus transitions and autofocus behavior that lets you focus on the shot instead of managing the lens. If you do not shoot wide, this is not your lens, but if you do, nothing else in this category comes close right now. Fun fact, 20mm on a full-frame sensor captures a horizontal field of view of around 94 degrees, meaning you are fitting almost a quarter of the full 360-degree world around you into a single frame. That is the wide-angle creator flex. The next one is for creators who want their prime to feel like a flagship decision. At number 3, we have the Nikon Nikkor Z 35mm f1.2s. The 35mm focal length is the one photographers argue about the most. Too wide for some, too tight for others. But for the creators who love it, and there are a lot of them, it is the focal length that feels closest to the way human eyes actually see the world. And the Nikkor Z35f 1.2s is the version that makes the Z system feel like it is playing at the very top of the game. 15 elements across 11 groups, including 2 extra low dispersion elements and 2 spherical elements, all working to deliver corner-to-corner sharpness that fast primes at this aperture historically struggled to achieve. At f1.2, most lenses show visible softness toward the edges, a trade photographers have accepted for decades. Nikon has engineered this lens to minimize that trade significantly. The Z mount's 68mm diameter is what makes it optically possible, giving engineers room to route light in ways that narrower mounts cannot accommodate. The subject separation at f1.2 on a 35mm is genuinely cinematic. The low light performance makes you reconsider whether you need an external light source at all. The S-line designation means Nikon's highest optical standard, best coatings, most precisely engineered build. This is not a lens you buy because you need a 35. This is the lens you buy because you want the 35 that makes your whole system feel serious. Fun fact, f1.2 lets in more than twice as much light as f1.8, which sounds small on paper, but in a dimly lit room at night. That difference is the one that separates a usable shot from a blurry mess. That is the premium storytelling prime. The next one is where this list stops being sensible entirely. At number 2, we have the Sigma 300 to 600mm f4 GOSS Sports. There is a point in every great countdown where the energy shifts, where the practical conversation ends and something else begins. The Sigma 300 to 600 f4 is that moment. This is a lens you look at and feel something, because the combination of focal range and constant aperture in front of you should not physically be possible in a zoom lens, and yet here it is. Previously, photographers needing this reach had 2 options: a fixed 600mm f4', costing roughly the same as a family car, or a variable aperture super telephoto zoom that surrenders 2 or more stops of light at the long end. The Sigma Sports collapses both into a single lens with a constant aperture across the entire range, magnesium alloy construction, full weather sealing, and an Arca Swiss compatible base plate built directly into the tripod foot. It also accepts both 1.4 times and 2 times teleconverters, meaning 600mm is not the end of the conversation. It is where things get interesting. f4 at 600mm, and constant. That is the number that separates this from every other super telephoto zoom on the market. The OS system keeps it usable at the long end when conditions are not perfect. For sports photographers who need to freeze action at extreme range, for wildlife shooters who cannot afford to lose light at the critical moment, this is the lens. Outrageous in the best possible way. Fun fact, a constant f4 aperture across 300 to 600mm means the front element of this lens has to be physically enormous to gather enough light at the long end, and it is, which is part of why this thing looks more like a telescope than a camera lens. That was the ridiculous flex. Number 1 is the beast the title promised. Before number 1, if you have made it this far, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Hit subscribe right now, because what we are about to talk about is the kind of lens that changes how you think about zoom glass entirely. At number 1, we have the Sony FE 50 to 150mm f2 f2 on a zoom lens, 50 to 150mm. Those 3 facts sitting together in the same sentence are the reason this lens is number 1. The Sony FE 50 to 150 f2 makes you reconsider every assumption you have ever made about what a zoom is supposed to be. The one thing that has always separated primes from zooms The aperture, the look, the light gathering, the Sony GM says, keep your primes. We found another way. Sony used an extreme aspherical element ground to tolerances measured in nanometers, alongside multiple extra low dispersion glass elements to control aberrations at an aperture that wide zooms at this range have never attempted. The result is bokeh at 150 millimeters f2, so smooth and cinematically rendered that it draws comparisons to cinema primes costing multiples of the price. Sony's linear autofocus system drives this lens fast enough to track a moving subject at f2 with a reliability that previous fast zoom lenses could not match. Full weather sealing, magnesium alloy barrel, fluorine-coated front element, and customizable focus hold buttons. Sony built this to be used hard in the field for years. At f2 across the entire range, this lens produces subject separation that does not feel like zoom glass. It feels like prime glass at every focal length between 50 and 150 millimeters, covering portraits, events, wildlife, sports, video, and documentary in a single piece of glass. The price reflects all of this honestly. This is not a budget buy, this is a commitment. But when you shoot your first frame at f2 at 150 millimeters and see what comes back, the question stops being whether it is worth it. The question becomes how quickly you can make it work. Fun fact, the extreme aspherical element inside this lens is polished to surface accuracy within 20 nanometers, roughly 200 times smaller than a single red blood cell, which is part of why the buck it produces looks less like a camera lens and more like something out of a cinema rental house. 2026 has no shortage of lens launches, but only a few feel like must-buy glass. And when you see what this Sony does at f2, calling it a beast stops sounding like hype. It just sounds accurate. That is the list. The buying links for all are in the description down below. If one of these lenses is already on your radar, or if we missed your favorite, drop it in the comments. We read everyone. Subscribe if you have not already, because next week we are going back into the gear room and it is worth being there for.